And we're live.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our council meeting for Monday, February the 8th, 2021. We have sort of a two-part agenda this evening. We have a committee of adjustment meeting, which I'll call to order first. We'll go through that, and then when that's concluded, we will call to order the regular council meeting and work our way through that agenda. We do have a couple of very special guests joining us though this evening. So before we get into committee of adjustment, if everybody can grant me the indulgence, I would like to do the congenital heart defects proclamation first, so that Penny and Tyson don't have to wait around and sit through a fairly lengthy committee of adjustment meeting to hear what they're here for. So how many years have we been doing this? Do you remember? Is this the 5th or 6th year?
It's more than that. I think we've been doing this since 2011.
Okay.
For us, it's our 5th. It's Penny's 5th year.
Penny's 5th year. Okay. Anyways, good. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, February 14th is designated throughout Ontario as Congenital Heart Defects Awareness Day, and in the town of Shelburne, we've also recognized that since 2011, evidently. So keeping with that tradition, I will read the proclamation, and it reads as follows. Whereas 1 in 70 newborns in Ontario are born with a type of congenital heart defect, making it the #1 birth defect and cause of death from a birth defect. There are 35 known types of congenital heart defects. Many babies will undergo unimaginable interventions in the first few hours of their lives due to CHD. Now, therefore, I, Wade Mills, on behalf of the Council of the Town of Shelburne, do hereby proclaim February 14th, 2021 as Congenital Heart Defects Awareness Day, and I encourage everyone to learn more about CHD and what they can do to help. So thanks, guys. Thanks for continuing to inspire us to do this every year and inspire the rest of the community to learn more about CHD and try to help where we can.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming. Too
Awesome.
bad we couldn't do it in person, but hopefully next year we'll be back to in-person attendance, and we can get some pictures.
That's great. Right. Thank you.
Okay. Take care, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Penny. Love you.
All right. So with that, I will call the Committee of Adjustment meeting to order. Tonight, we have a public meeting being held under subsection 45, sub 5, and section 53 of the Planning Act to consider a minor variance application as well as 2 consent applications. The minor variance application is for property located at 885 O'Reilly Crescent. The purpose and effect of this application is to request relief from section 5.68 of zoning bylaw number 38-2007 in order to permit a converted dwelling with a dwelling unit in the lower level of the dwelling, which is defined as a cellar in the zoning bylaw. The application is seeking relief from the regulation which states that a dwelling unit shall not be located in the cellar of a dwelling. The first of the 2 consent applications is for property located at the east end of Main Street East. The purpose and effect of the application is to sever a portion of the property to have a land area of 1,406 square meters to create a new residential lot on the subject land for a new single detached dwelling. And the second consent application is for the property located at 302 First Avenue East. And the purpose and effect of this application is to sever a portion of that property to have a land area of 345 square meters to create a new residential lot for a single detached dwelling on the subject land. I'll ask the clerk for the method of notice for tonight's public meeting.
Notice of tonight's public meeting was advertised in local media sources as of January 14th, 2021. Notice is posted on the town's website, and property owners within a 60-meter radius have received notification.
Okay, thank you. So in the case of each of the three applications, we will have a presentation by the town planner, Steve Weaver, who's online. He'll provide a summary of the written comments received, following which there will be an opportunity for questions from members of the committee as well as members of the public. So with that, Steve, I'd ask that you walk us through the first minor variance application.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, committee members. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, great. Just before I bring up the first presentation, I just wanted to make a brief introduction to Jenna Dom. Jenna, if you can turn your camera on for a sec, there she is. Jenna joined our firm GSP Group back in, I think it was October, and has been working as the town's planning coordinator since then. And I wanted to make sure you could put a face to that name, because Jenna has assisted with the reports that are on your agenda tonight and has been a great help so far going through the various planning duties that we do day to day. So now you know who she is.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Jenna, welcome.
Thank you.
And with that, I will bring up the minor variance presentation. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, so the first application on the agenda tonight is A2101. It's an application for minor variance filed by Dilpreet Singh. Mr. Singh is joining us for the meeting tonight, and the property that is subject to this application is at 885 O'Reilly Crescent. That's not the right map, sorry. So this is a plan that was provided with the application. This is an existing two-story dwelling in the Greenbrook Village subdivision. This is just a drawing to show the layout of the lot as it exists today. So you can see there that the dark line represents the boundaries or the outside exterior walls of the existing two-story house. There is a double car garage attached to the house, which has enough space for parking two vehicles. And there's a 2-car wide driveway in front of that as well. There is a bit of a covered porch at the front of the house, and the backyard is approximately 50 feet deep. And then you can see that there's some setbacks along the sides as well, and at the front along O'Reilly Crescent. The applicant also provided this plan of the lower level of the dwelling, which is predominantly below grade, and thus the minor variance application. The zoning bylaw permits in the zone that applies to this property and to the subdivision more generally, which is R3, a converted dwelling. And a converted dwelling is simply a single detached dwelling that's been converted to contain 2 dwelling units inside of the dwelling. The floor plan that you see here just illustrates the conversion plans that the owner has provided to renovate and finish the lower level. Basically, the majority of the lower level would be allocated to a 2-bedroom apartment. You can see there are 2 bedrooms shown, as well as a small kitchen, living room, dining room area, a washroom, and the existing furnace and utility room is shown here. The other kind of front half of the lower level would continue to be used by the occupants of the main dwelling, and that includes a rec room at the bottom of the stairs and a laundry room, as well as a bathroom, some closet space, and a bedroom that's linked to the main dwelling on the main floor and second floor. So the zoning bylaw has 2 terms that are defined in relation to converted dwellings and dwelling units more generally. The first term is that's defined as a cellar, and contrary to what you might envision, in terms of a cellar, which is kind of an unfinished lower level space that may have a low ceiling or, may not be appropriate for habitable space. The zoning bylaw defines a cellar as meaning any lower level that has more than 50% of its height from floor to ceiling below grade. So a traditional basement in the conventional sense, in most new homes or existing homes, would actually be considered a cellar by the way the zoning bylaw defines it. So again, anything that's got more than 50% of its vertical height below the grade level, which is represented here, is considered a cellar. A basement is defined in the zoning bylaw as a lower level that has more than 50 or at least 50% or more of its vertical space above grade. So again, this is more like a bungalow design where you have, the majority of the vertical space above the grade level, the surrounding grade. And the reason that the zoning bylaw creates these definitions is that it allows for a dwelling unit to be located in a basement, but it does not allow for a dwelling unit to be located in a cellar. And again, that height and how much of it is below grade is the distinguishing factor there. So this illustration is actually right from the zoning bylaw, and it's not formally part of the zoning bylaw. It is provided as an illustration to help with the interpretation of the bylaw. So when we compare that with, this existing two-story dwelling at 885 O'Reilly, you can see that it would be defined as a cellar because this distance B is greater than A. In other words, most of the vertical height between the finished floor and the finished ceiling of the basement is below the grade of the surrounding land area. Now, I guess before I move on to the circulation comments, just to get into that a little bit more, just because a certain amount of space is below grade doesn't mean that it's not habitable space. We haven't really been able to figure out why the zoning bylaw defines a cellar the way it does, or how that came to be. It is a provision that exists in some municipal zoning bylaws, mostly older zoning bylaws, but there is no building code or fire code relationship to it. In other words, the building code wouldn't prevent a basement or a lower level that's got the majority of its space below grade from being used for a dwelling unit. Basement apartments are fairly common, and as long as they can provide the necessary egress through adequately sized windows, as well as appropriate fire separation from the unit above to meet building and fire code requirements, generally basements, especially in newer homes, are capable of being finished and occupied for dwelling units for a basement apartment. So the application was circulated in accordance with the Planning Act, and this is just a brief summary of the responses that we received. I've provided this slide because some of these responses were not received at the time that the report went into the agenda, but just to summarize, all of these agencies listed indicated no comments or objections. The County Planning Department, as they always do, had indicated to consult with the Nottawasaga Valley Conservation Authority. The NVCA has been circulated. We have not received comments from them, but to suffice it to say that the lot is not within a regulated area that the Conservation Authority would be concerned about. The county planning comment relates more to source water protection, but if the lot is not within a source water protection or wellhead protection area. So I don't anticipate any concerns from the NVCA. We will monitor for any comments from them. But in general, they do not comment on these types of applications or indicate no objection to them. From an engineering perspective, the engineering consultants, SBA, just noted that, as we see more of these, we have to make sure we are mindful of tracking them, and we have been, against the available wastewater treatment capacity, because as more and more dwelling units have a second unit in them, obviously that affects the number of people in the house, the wastewater flows that can be expected, and as a result, we have to allocate a dwelling unit of capacity when these proposals come forward. There is a reserve established for this kind of thing. The dwelling is within an area of an existing serviced subdivision. And we do have a reserve that allows for things like second unit conversions. And every time one of these is approved, we subtract from the remaining capacity reserve for that type of infill and redevelopment. I just put this map on a slide just to quickly recap why we get these comments from the county each time about consulting with the NVCA. So this is an appendix to the county official plan. It illustrates in blue some older mapping of the wellhead protection areas. I'm in the process of working with the county to get that updated because that is actually not an accurate map of the current known wellhead protection areas. It's an older version. So that's why we get those comments from time to time from the county. They're referring to the appendix in the county OP, but as we look at the actual accurate up-to-date mapping, the extent of the wellhead protection area is actually smaller within the town. Now, in this case, the property is somewhere up here. The county has just flagged it may be within or close to this kind of jagged red line, which illustrates a high vulnerability aquifer. But again, this is within a fully serviced, developed subdivision. So any concerns with respect to aquifers or groundwater have been resolved through the subdivision process. The source water protection risk management official indicated no comments or concerns at the time the subdivision was built. So that's just why we get those comments, because they're noting that the county, when they refer to their mapping, there is a highly vulnerable aquifer mapped in the area, although this mapping is very general in nature, and any groundwater concerns were cleared at the time of subdivision approval. So that is my presentation. We did receive more recently a letter dated actually last Friday from a resident of the neighborhood. The name on the letter is Lori Ribeiro, and it's actually an email, sorry. The email reads as follows. Hi, I have several concerns around this being approved. I would not support this application. First, this is a rental property to which is not maintained well. Grass is kept very long in the summer. Snow is not cleared in the winter by the current tenant or homeowner. Secondly, the owner of 881 O'Reilly, so that's the property to the west of the subject property, is another landlord and does not live in the neighborhood. Their support is strictly a monetary one, as if this one is approved for 885, then they will apply to do the same thing at their property. They are supporting this out of their own interests and financial benefit. Thirdly, cars and traffic in the neighborhood. I do not deny that technically there are enough parking spaces. However, many people have more than one car, and in this neighborhood, they are parked everywhere except the driveway or garage. There are lots of small children in the neighborhood, so additional traffic poses risks of a child getting hit. This neighborhood is not supposed to be one rental inside of rentals. They are supposed to be single family homes. There are many properties that have basements being rented, legal or illegal, out. If this is permitted, then it is only going to get worse and worse. Thank you, Lori. We did also receive, as referenced in that letter, a letter of support from the resident of 881 O'Reilly Crescent, Mr. Chiamini Anthony. And that letter reads as follows. I'm the owner of 881 O'Reilly Crescent, Shelburne, Ontario, which is the left side of the property to the subject to the application noted above. I've reviewed the details of the minor variance application, and I'm writing herein to provide my support for this minor variance application for house 885 O'Reilly Crescent. So that's the only public commentary that we've received on this application. We have provided a summary of our evaluation of the application under the 4 tests for a minor variance and have found that it does meet those tests. Now, in making that determination, we did consider the Planning Act as recently amended. So the Planning Act does require that municipalities make provision for a second unit within every single detached dwelling. That doesn't mean it's going to be permitted in every case. For example, the regulation says that a minimum of 1 parking space shall be provided. So 1 additional to the parking required for the main dwelling. In this case, that is satisfied because they will have 2 parking spaces plus the driveway. The regulation does also require that municipalities make provision for a detached accessory dwelling unit. So for example, if a building was built to the rear of the house, like a kind of like a granny suite or a granny flat, the town zoning bylaw and official plan has to make provision for that. So there are standards that the town can apply. In this case, the minor variance application is triggered only because the lower level of the dwelling is more than 50% below grade. But again, as we've investigated that provision over the years, we haven't been able to find any link to any building code, fire code, or other reason for that. The owners of these types of dwellings and anyone who wishes to convert a basement or a lower level to a dwelling unit will have to meet all of those code requirements in order to get a building permit. So that is my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee or other questions as they come up. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Are there any questions from committee members first? Councillor Bernardo.
Steve, is the fire chief going to be notified of this basement for inspection?
Yes, the fire department was circulated. The chief did respond indicating no comments or objections, but my understanding is that as part of the building code inspections through the permit process before occupancy, there are inspections by fire as well to ensure fire code compliance.
And you were saying that egress is part of it as well. Something about the separation from the upper level. There has to be what, insulation, fire insulation? I'm trying to understand that part.
Yeah, all of that's dictated by the fire and building codes. It requires thicker drywall, and I think it requires some ceiling insulation as well. I don't know all of the details of what's required by the building and fire codes for that, but that has been identified to me in the past by a previous fire chief that there is thicker drywall required as the main requirement.
Okay, and my second question on the parking, you're counting the parking as 2 in the garage and 2 in the driveway, or are you counting that they have enough length of driveway for parking?
So the zoning bylaw requires 1 parking space for the house as it exists today, and then 1 parking space for the additional dwelling unit. So the garage, because it's a 2-car garage, that provides 2 required spaces. If they needed additional parking, like if there were 3 vehicles or 4 vehicles, there is space within the driveway in front of the garage as well.
Yeah, I never count the garage as a parking space. Chances are there's more junk in a garage than there is cars. Okay, thank you. That was my questions.
Any other members of the committee? Member Anderson.
Thank you. I mean, I don't have any doubt that, Steve, when you're overseeing this, that if this is approved, that it's going to meet code. I mean, I think, and I'm comfortable speaking certainly for myself, but I don't think anybody would disagree that you would ensure that whatever is necessary that this homeowner would have to oblige or adhere to. So that's the least of my concerns. My concern is I'm picking up on something that one of the letters that came in, or the letter that's in opposition to this, about the fact that it's a rental and another rental, that the homeowner is not there. They're already renting out the property. Then they have this other downstairs basement that they're looking to rent out. They've spoken about the condition of the place whether it's in the winter or in the summertime, with respect to, in essence, the property being derelict, and what that may do to other people who are similarly looking to rent out their spaces, and what that will ultimately do to the neighborhood and value of property. And so the adherence to the regulations I'm not concerned about. I'm concerned about the way these kinds of properties are being kept. And I know this is not the first time we've had conversations like this with other sort of properties that are being considered and whether homeowners are actually living in the place. I think I'd have felt more comfortable, to be honest, if the homeowner was there, living there, and then they decided to do something in the basement, because there would be a perception at least that they have a vested interest in maintaining the property because they're living there. And so that's the concern that I have. I don't know if anybody else shares it, but and so it's not the regulation component, it's just that aspect that worries me.
I should have spoken to that as part of my report as well, because it was raised in the resident comments about owner occupancy. Now, there is a note on the drawing that says part of the basement space is owner occupied, but contrary to that, the resident who commented indicated that it's not owner occupied. So I suppose we could direct that question to the property owner tonight, Mr. Singh. But before you consider that, the regulation that the province approved 2 years ago does specifically say that municipalities through their zoning bylaws cannot require owner occupancy of these types of converted dwellings. It was a provision that many municipalities had in the past for the reasons that you've outlined. But the province has essentially regulated that out of the realm of municipal jurisdiction.
Yeah, just to that point, Steve, is Mr. Singh on the line? I see his name there. I don't.
Yeah, I'm here, right here.
So as I understand it, sorry, Mr. Singh, are you the owner or the owner's representative?
I'm the representative. The owner is also in here. It's going by his phone number, 647.
Okay, yeah, I see that. So is any portion of the property actually occupied by the owner?
So right now the main floor is rented out, as the whole upper portion of the house is on rental, right? Later on, the homeowner does have plans to move into the property. Right now, the homeowner does live in Brampton. He doesn't live in the actual residence for this subject property, but he does have plans to actually move there himself. But also, like I would say again, right? One thing is that even though it is two separate apartments, it's very common to have two separate apartments rented out, where you have the main and second floor rented out to one family and have the basement rented out as a second family for an investment property, right? So whereas a homeowner might have two different properties, one as his primary unit and one as his investment property, he wouldn't want to just rent the whole property to one person, because one, it impacts his the amount of money he can get as an income, and two, it doesn't apply help with affordable housing, right? So whereas
yeah, fair enough. We were just, I think, wondering because there was a bit of a discrepancy just given what the neighbor had said, but I think you clarified that, so that the owner does plan on occupying the main floor unit at some point.
Yeah, so that's in his plan for the future.
Okay. So Steve, am I right in saying that, you know, if it weren't for, you know, perhaps the fact that our zoning bylaw definition of seller is perhaps outdated compared to other municipalities, this wouldn't even be before us?
That's correct. At some point in time, and normally it's done through the comprehensive review of the town zoning bylaw, the provisions that exist in there today will need to be updated to make clear and up-to-date regulations for converted dwellings.
And that's what I was just going to ask. Moving forward, if we should look at updating those definitions of seller.
Yeah, and the province has taken such a strong stance on permitting these that when those provisions are amended, in fact, there are no appeals to that part of the bylaw. So we have to put into force what the province has put into the Planning Act, and that will. Now, as the engineers have raised, cumulatively, there can be some servicing impacts there. So we can, look at that as, something that could merit some limitations. And parking is certainly the other key limitation. Many properties won't be able to provide the second parking space in a location that would be permitted. So that is a limiting factor, but we want to look at those, two issues more fulsomely before we make a recommendation on the comprehensive zoning regulations.
Yeah, Member Anderson.
Just another quick question, and this may be completely out of bounds, but and so I'm just trying to wrestle with how to deal this for my own sake, and maybe even for the person who wrote the email. Is it possible, and it may not be, but is it possible in awarding this kind of approval that as a condition, because the concern seems to be, maintaining the property to a level that would be if the homeowner was there, could there be some condition attached that if this goes ahead, that the owner agrees that the property will be maintained, et cetera, et cetera? Is that something that we could impose as a condition to this kind of approval or not?
I think those sorts of conditions already exist through our property standards bylaw. I mean, and if those are concerns that the neighbor has, I think likely, seeking remedy through that channel is likely the better avenue. So, I mean, if there are concerns with the way any property is maintained, then a complaint could be made under the property standards bylaw to our bylaw enforcement officer. I see Jennifer's turned her video on there, so feel free to add. But I think that's the more appropriate avenue for remedy for those kinds of concerns.
Yeah, I guess I think what we've seen before in the past, as we talk about driven complaints, is the apprehension in doing that. A lot of people don't necessarily feel comfortable; they feel exposed, and I think we're not. This is not a new situation when it comes to people wanting to do that or the willingness to do that. And so I just wonder if this was just an added measure that we could take, albeit there are other tools that, as you deem, may be more appropriate. But in light of what we've seen before in the past, I just wonder if this is an extra added step that we could take to ensure that these properties are going to be maintained, because it's not just for that neighbor's concern, it's everybody's concern in that neighborhood, in the way that we want to see our community maintained. And so I think we'd be speaking on the behalf of all residents and not just that resident that sent the email. But again, if it's not possible, and as you suggest that, and I know Jennifer is going to chime in just now, that this is the more appropriate way, then so be it.
Jennifer, did you want to add anything there?
I was just going to add in through your worship that the complaint process is strictly confidential. Nothing is ever released. And that would be your main route of itemizing any type of derelict properties would be through the complaint process in order for the bylaw enforcement officer to enforce our property standards bylaw.
I mean, I certainly see what you're saying, Member Anderson. It seems redundant to me. I mean, if we were to impose a condition saying that, as a condition of this approval, the property must be kept in accordance with our property standards bylaw. Well, it already has to be, kept in accordance with that bylaw anyways. So I, practically, I don't think it raises the bar in terms of standards in any way. And to impose conditions beyond our property standards bylaw, I don't think is something probably that we could do within the planning context, but I stand to be corrected, Steve.
One of the things that the Planning Act does provide is that as a condition of a minor variance, like a condition of a consent, you can require the owner to enter into an agreement with the municipality. And in those agreements, I mean, anything that the parties can agree to can go in them. In general, like consent agreements, those agreements are more about the actions that have to be taken by the owner to implement the approval. So, construct the additional unit, get the required inspections, and then get the sign off, and then the agreement is either released or is basically satisfied. Ongoing measures like maintenance are on a specific property like that, unless it's a commercial site plan or something, are less common, and ultimately, as Mr. Chairman has alluded to, it would just refer to the property standards bylaw, and whether it's stated in an agreement that's on title or not, it would require resources by the town to enforce it. So you would end up sending, the bylaw enforcement officer to request that the owner, mow the grass or remove any unsightly storage, whatever the issue may be. It may add some teeth to the enforceability of that, say if it went to the courts, but the hope is always that we can resolve those matters, outside of taking that additional step. So there is no perfect solution, but in general, I agree with the comments that the property standards issues are most appropriately dealt with on an individual residential property like this through that specific bylaw.
Member Wagner?
Hi, yes, thank you very much. I definitely agree with Member Anderson and what he's saying with regards, of course, to property standards and whatnot. Basically, he covered everything I was thinking of saying. What I would just like to do right now is, because the owner is in attendance to the meeting, I would just like to maybe reach out and ask that, he take the necessary steps to make sure that the property is in good standard. When someone takes that initiative on their own, they create really good neighbor connections. So if nobody has, if there's no reason to argue the fact that they don't want this to happen because the property is in dire states, if it isn't, then they won't have any quorum over it happening. So you can kind of take hold of your own destiny, I guess you could say, and by stepping up and making sure that the snow is plowed and the grass is cut and the leaves are raked. It benefits the community as a whole, but it also benefits the homeowner because he creates good bonds with his neighbors. So that would just be my request to the owner until he moves in, which he did say he would be looking to do, which welcome to the town of Shelburne when you get here. But until that time, if you were to sort of step up and take care of these things or these concerns that your neighbors have, it just, like I said, it creates good neighborhood bonds. So I'll leave it in your court, and but that is my request, is just to sort of do good by your neighbors by just maintaining the property. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions from committee members? I know there's at least one public question or comment. Okay, so I don't see anything else. I think Ms. Ribeiro.
Hello, can you?
Yep, there we go.
So I guess ultimately I'll just tag on to saying, or Ms. Wagner was saying, is when does the homeowner plan on actually moving in? The big concern right now is that 885 and 881 are both rental properties. So if 885 has now suddenly approval to have 2 units, 881 would be looking at doing this similar process, I'm almost 99% sure, in the near future. So the concern is going to be, is this going to become a neighborhood of rental properties? That's really, I guess, my ultimate concern. But the question is, when does the homeowner plan on moving in?
Mr. Singh, do you want to tackle that? Or the homeowner, if he's able to.
Ray, yeah, if you want to. Ray, are you on the line?
Yeah, I'm online. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, hey, okay, so just coming back to one of the comments just earlier, just to answer that, like, the property has been well maintained. Like, even last summer, when I was there, I noticed the grass were dying. So I've actually came down myself to reseed the grass and everything. to make sure that the grass is, it's growing and everything. So like I've made sure that it's maintained properly, snow is cleaned, whatnot. Okay, so going forward, when am I looking to move in? To be honest, just this COVID situation is pretty bad. That's one. Second is I cannot, like the tenant right now, I don't want to jeopardize anybody to leave at the situation where I'm actually, it's very hard to say anything to tenants right now to leave the home in any manner. It's not the right situation. So until all this is resolved, gets back to normal, I'll definitely be moving in once the project is finished, because I'm getting this, let's say, going through this process, I'm not even sure when we will start or whatnot. I don't have any schedules planned out as in the next couple of months or something, if you understand what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah. Okay. So no definite timelines.
It definitely is a timeline, like the next 1 to 2 years, but I don't think anything will be done until this COVID issue is kind of resolved. To say anything to a tenant to leave, I don't think it's appropriate right now. That's the only thing, nothing else.
Okay. All right. Were there any other public comments or questions? No. Okay. Last call.
Sorry, just I'll take the last call. And I thank the owner for stepping in and answering that question the best that he could. And I appreciate the sensitivities that you are noting for the tenants. But we all, I guess, Steve, the point is, and Member Mills, I'm sure you will agree, I guess, with this, is that we could always treat this a similar application on a case-by-case basis, in the sense that if we approve this one, it doesn't necessarily mean, for example, if 881 does come forward, that we have to under similar circumstances, or are we bound to do it because we approved 885? And the reason why I say that is, so for example, let's say with this one here, we allow it to go through, and we now have to use our bylaw officer chasing the owner down to make sure that this property is kept in good standard. And then 881 actually does come online and say that they want to do the exact same thing. I don't want to be handcuffed because we approved 885 to say to 881, hey, listen, you know what? We've already had this experience already, and we don't want to be in the situation again. So does this hamper our ability, if another one were to come online on a case-by-case to say no, if we were to approve this one?
Steve, is there any precedent that is set?
No, through you, Mr. Chairman, each application is reviewed on its merits. We would check that it, meets all the policies and zoning requirements and save for any variance that's required. I would say most of the dwellings in the subdivision and throughout the town would require relief from this section of the bylaw because they have a traditional lower level, which is mostly below grade. But going forward, the bigger constraint to really limiting these second units is the Provincial Planning Act and the associated regulations, which again, they do require all municipalities throughout the province to make provision for them. So, it does provide an opportunity for homeowners to create a second unit. And we have to make sure that that opportunity is included in the zoning bylaw. So we will carefully review, what impacts that could have if it's done broadly, to make sure that the zoning rules are updated in a way that, doesn't create bigger problems down the road with respect to servicing or parking, for example. I would say generally, though, property standards can be an issue regardless of whether it's owner occupancy or rental. And, setting aside the questions around, making a second unit in a house, the town also is not able to, through its zoning bylaw, regulate whether a home is occupied by a renter or by an owner. So this subdivision or any other, single detached home in town, the town does not have authority to say this shall be ownership, this shall be rental. If an owner rents, that is their prerogative.
Mr. Singh, I think I saw your hand again.
Yeah, just want to say, just want to add on to Steve. I was just gonna say, in terms of like this application, the town of Shelburne does allow 4 second units, right? The main thing with this application was really the definition of a cellar compared to a basement, which I think if we all could agree on that, it really is an outdated definition, just because unless your house is a walkout, right, completely walkout. So if this house was a walkout, there would be no minor variance application. We would just be able to get the second unit dwelling. Obviously, regardless, we are meeting all building codes. So we are putting fire rating, we're putting insulation resilient channels, and 5/8 inch drywall on the ceilings alone. Same with the walls, we're putting insulation, resilient channels, and 5/8 drywalls for all fire rated walls. There's going to be 2 egress windows, one for the owner occupied section and one for the rental portion, right? So it meets all zoning bylaws and building codes. The only thing is really just a definition. And in terms of maintenance and everything, like I don't live there. It's not my property or anything. I will just add on to it. I did go there for my measurements for the property, for the drawings that we made. The house itself, it's only a few years old. It's in a good neighborhood. In terms of the grass and everything, it was like, not to be on a biased point of view or nothing. It really doesn't affect me, but just for my opinion, it was good. There was no really complaint on for whatever day I went to, right? The inside is completely it's brand new. There's nothing wrong with it. I didn't see any difference between this house and the next house or the next house like after that either. That's just my point of view. I just want to let that out before we. Thank you.
Yeah. No, yeah. Thank you. I appreciate that. And you know, I think anytime there's a discussion about, you know, upkeep of properties, it's necessarily subjective. And you know what one person thinks is fantastic, another may not. And that's always sort of a tricky line to walk. And that's one of the reasons that we have, you know, what we hope is at least an objective property standard bylaw. And just one further point that I'll make before we try to wrap this up. I do think that the property owner deserves some credit here for going through proper channels and making this application for trying to bring this into conformity through legal and proper means, as opposed to just trying to, you know, fly under the radar and you know, essentially create a second unit without anyone knowing. So I do appreciate that, and I do think that a certain amount of credit is due to the owner in that respect. Last call for questions or comments from the committee before I ask for a motion. Okay, I don't see any. Is there a mover and seconder there willing to move this ahead for approval? Member Anderson, seconded by Member Buffett. Okay, so it will read, after considering the application, the committee is satisfied that the request is desirable for the appropriate and continued use of the subject property, maintains the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw and official plan, and is minor in nature. Accordingly, the committee resolves to grant the request. The minor variance is granted in accordance with the sketch plan provided to the committee and attached here too, only to allow the existing single detached dwelling at 885 O'Reilly Crescent to be used as a converted dwelling with a maximum of 2 dwelling units, no more than one of which may be located within the lowest floor level of the existing dwelling in an appropriately designed and finished habitable space that meets building, fire, and electrical safety code requirements. Is there any further discussion on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay. Thank you. So on to the next one. Steve, this is the first consent application for it's B20-05 Montgomery Village Homes on Main Street East.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So moving on to the next public meeting, and I believe Mr. Albert Bax is in attendance as well as the property owner and the owner of Montgomery Homes. So application B2005 is for Main Street East. It's a property without a civic address, and the legal description of the property is provided there. So this air photo map just provides a little bit of an overview of the context for the property and the surroundings. You can see it's an irregular shaped property on the south side of Main Street East, which is Highway 89, Highway 10 and 89 in this location. The property is within the MTO jurisdiction of the highway. So there will be permits required from the MTO for access and for any construction on the lots if the severance is approved. You can see the land to the south and to the west is residential, single detached residential. There were some severances a couple of years ago on the north side of School Road, and there have been 3 homes constructed by the applicant on those 3 properties, which are 16, 18, and 20 School Road. Immediately to the south of the property are 10, 12, and 14 School Road. And immediately to the east is actually an assembly of properties under common ownership that are all zoned and designated for future commercial use. So that, I believe that house shown to the east is no longer there. Again, just a broader view of the surrounding context. You can see it exists at the edge of a residential area, at the very easterly edge of the School Road, Main Street, Simon Street residential area, and to the east of that is commercial. The no frills across County Road 11, Wrigglesworth Plaza to the northeast, and the industrial commercial area to the north. So not quite directly across from Centennial Street at Highway 10 and 89. This property was at one point 2 properties. It took a little bit of investigation to realize that due to a change in the ownership name over the years, the properties did merge together, but they were 2 separate lots at one point. I think what happened is the original owners who had registered the properties in separate names, they both passed on, and both properties as a result were put in the name of the common estate. And when they were put into that common estate name, they merged together. So since that time, Montgomery Village Homes has purchased the property and is seeking to reestablish that lot line between the 2. So that's why there's a bit of an irregular shape to the property. There were 2 separate lots there. I'm not sure at what point a widening of Highway 1089 was taken from the west property, but it was taken and has not yet been taken for the east property. We're awaiting confirmation from MTO, but based on preliminary discussion, it does sound like the MTO will require that same widening from the east property. So both properties will be quite large in size as compared with other residential properties in town. The minimum, for example, in the R4 zone is 300 square meters. So these properties are each easily 4 times that size. So lots of area to create a building envelope. There is a 14-meter setback required from the highway for any buildings or structures. The properties are both zoned R1-1, as are the majority of the lots in this area. The minimum lot area is 900 square meters in this area. The reason for that is some of the lots in the area that have houses on them already are on septic systems. But this lot would be developed on full municipal services, which is required by the official plan. The minimum lot frontage per lot is 18.3 meters. And each of those 2 lots can meet that. You can see here the east lot would be about 23 meters, the west lot about 30 meters. The front yard setback, is 7.6 meters in the zoning bylaw, but MTO has identified a 14-meter setback from the south limit of the highway. The side yards are required to be 1.5 meters on each side. The rear yard, 7.5 meters minimum. The lot coverage is 33%. So again, more than about 2/3 of the properties of each property would be required to be maintained as, landscaped areas and open space. And the maximum height is, 2 to 2.5 stories, which is 9.2 meters, which is the maximum height for all the rest of the lots in the neighborhood. So we did circulate this consent application to all the required agencies and departments. The building department indicated no issues. County planning, again, gave us their typical comment about consulting with the NVCA. In this case, on that county appendix to the county official plan, the property is not within a wellhead protection area. It's not within a groundwater recharge area, but it is within a low vulnerability aquifer. There is no source water protection requirements associated with that for residential development on full services. The Dufferin Peel Catholic District School Board, the Operations Department, the Fire Department, Amaranth, all indicated no comments or objections. Hydro One just provided their contact information for hydro servicing. Engineering has looked at the serviceability of the property. From a drainage perspective, they've noted that there is a catch basin located to the east on Highway 1089, which may provide a drainage outlet for at least parts of the lots. That the majority of the site is low-lying and generally currently drains to the southeast. That's the natural lay of the land. There is a sanitary manhole to the west on Highway 1089, so there will a sewer extension along Highway 1089 will be required to service the east lot. The MTO has indicated that they would only support single detached residential development of up to 5 lots in this area due to the proximity to existing intersections, and that driveways will require MTO permission. So that will be a requirement prior to lot development. And I've noted the highway widening that we expect MTO will require. So subject to the comments and questions tonight, we have identified some recommended conditions if the consent is approved. One of those, importantly, would be the consent agreement that the owner will be required to enter into with the town. It will provide all of the owner obligations with respect to servicing the lots, grading the lots, ensuring that any existing drainage through the lots is maintained and that there's no additional drainage impacts to any other lands or highways in the area. MTO will obviously be reviewing drainage as well, and driveways and other matters that relate to the development of the lots, that the highway widening, if required by MTO, would be dedicated, and that the draft and final reference plans will be provided, and there's 1 year to satisfy those conditions. We did receive a couple of letters this afternoon from residents in the area, and I'm just going to pull those up now so I can read them into the record. So the first letter is dated today's date, Monday, February 8th, to the Committee of Adjustment for application B2005. This letter reads, in response to the notice we received for the severance of part of Lot 32, Concession 2, Part 1 of Plan 7R1552, and Part 1 of Plan 7R350, we are writing to express our concerns about the drainage of water from the surrounding area in our backyard that ultimately flows through the above properties into the wetlands marsh adjacent to it. The surrounding areas beginning west of the home at 20 School Road all drain into this marsh. There is a significant slope, 4 to 6 feet, through the backyards of 20, 18, and 16 School Road as a result of regrading that drain into our backyard at 14 School Road, where the slope becomes almost level with only a few inches drop from the east side of 14 School Road to the edge of the marsh indicated as area 731 on the notice. That water presently drains across the area indicated for severance into the marsh, although very slowly in comparison to the water coming from 16, 18, and 20 School Road and adjacent properties facing Main Street. Of note, the area marked 731 sustains hydrophytic plants such as cattails during the entire growing season and is always wet at the surface, even during midsummer, and should be considered a sensitive area in regard to water accumulation and water table. We do not want to become the holding area for water that was meant to flow into that marsh or elsewhere. We ask at this time that the general lay/cut of the land be assessed and no obstruction of the water flow occurs at any time, and priority be given to continued intended drainage of our property and remediation of water which now flows from our neighbors to the east, so that no one experiences accumulation and or pooling of water now or going forward as a result of any alteration of the land in this application of consent. This is from Keith Quinn and Sandra Williams of 14 School Road. And the second letter with today's date is addressed to the committee, and it reads as follows. I would like to make my concerns known regarding the notice I received. Application of consent B2005. I live at 12 School Road and have maintained the property described as part of Lot 32, Concession 2, Part 1 of Plan 7R1552 and Part 1 of Plan 7R350. Water drains from my backyard through the above property into the marsh. This is a natural cut in the land, and drainage away from my home depends on the water clearing via this natural cut to the marsh. There are no man-made drains in this area whatsoever. I am also well aware, having maintained the lawns on the above property for the past 20+ years, that the marsh area adjacent to this land never dries up during the summer. Walking on the lawn near it, even in the driest of summers, can result in sinking into the grass and water welling up. My property is recipient to water draining from properties to the east and is also very close to an area that is constantly saturated. Seeing that this area above is the only direction water is able to flow away from my property, which properties to the east now feed into, I would like to make it known that I have considerable concerns with how the drainage of my property will be affected. If there's any alteration negating the shallow slope of which the runoff occurs on that property, the water will pool in my yard given the accumulated runoff from the highest point of the street. I ask that remedial drainage be addressed early on with any alterations made to this property, as it is obvious any changes to the lay of the land will affect the drainage of my property. And that one's from Barbara Smith of 12 School Road. So those are the comments received. As I mentioned, they just were received today. They have been forwarded to the applicant. I obviously have not had a chance to review those comments with the town's engineer or with the town's director of public works. There has been previous review by both the director and the town engineer of this area from a drainage perspective in conjunction with the servicing and development of the lots at along School Road. They have identified the requirements as it pertains to drainage, that there will be, continued drainage from the adjoining properties through this property that will have to be continued to carry through, and that any additional runoff created by these properties will have to be addressed through the drainage design and grading design of the lots in accordance with an agreement with the town. We don't have a detailed, lot grading plan at this point. It is a requirement for ultimately building on the lot and having the consent agreement. But that really is a matter for further engineering review to ensure the lots are properly graded and drained and do not impact other properties in the area. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I'm happy to entertain any questions from the committee or the public. Thank you.
Member Bernardo.
Most of these properties drained to the commercial property at County Road 11, that large marsh area. That marsh area, is all the years that I've lived here, which have been considerable, has always been wet. And it's where the natural hydrology of that area used to drain to. If these houses are built and we do put the drainage in there and that marsh is already at capacity, where is that additional water going to go? That is the question I kind of have, because I do know, and I've had to deal with some of the neighbors in that area, even with the 3 new homes that were built in there by Mr. Bax. There has been some issues with water, especially in the summertime, draining into people's backyards and their inability to enjoy their own backyards.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So I definitely don't have all the answers on, grading design at this point. What I will say is that the standard that is used to review the engineered drainage and grading plans for new lots like this is that the amount of runoff coming from those lots and any lots, upstream that's carrying through these lots is to be the same. It's supposed to be designed to be the same after development as it is today. So, the additional runoff created by the rooftops and so forth is supposed to be contained within the lot via, the downspouts, maybe even going into a weeping tile and then connected to a storm drain. Again, I don't know exactly what that will look like for these lots or how that will be achieved. But that is the requirement and the criteria that the engineers use to review the lot grading plan. That is not directed simply, any additional runoff simply directed to land that's downslope, that it's supposed to be contained within the lot or directed to a storm sewer or an approved, ditch or something like that. But, it can be challenging on some of these lots. So that's really the best that I can say to respond to those kind of questions at this point.
So if I can further ask, is there some methodology? I know you talk about the engineering, but how do we get a guarantee, after all is done and that it will be done so that there is no issue for neighbors?
Through you, Mr. Chairman. So the process is, there's a lot, an engineered lot grading plan prepared by the owner, which is reviewed by the town's engineers and Mr. Moss. And once that plan has been accepted from a design perspective, it becomes part of the approvals, and there's deposits required on each lot. And those deposits are held by the town until all of the grading work and all of the sodding and finishing surfaces are done. And then once those are done, Jim inspects the post-construction condition to make sure everything was graded in accordance with the plan. And then if everything is satisfactory, then the deposits are released to the owner. If they're not satisfied, then a deposit is, held back until Jim is satisfied. Or, worst case, if the town couldn't reach an agreement to rectify any problems, the deposits could be used by the town to rectify. Obviously, just minor problems because the deposits are not a really large amount. But that's basically the process to check the grading.
Yeah, I know the process. That was where I was going with. Our engineers don't actually ever go out and site the property itself to see how the drainage system currently works or anything like that. They just accept the plan that is drawn up for them by the applicant, and they review it. They don't actually see the lay of the land.
They do. So again, through you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the first things that's done by Jim when an inquiry like this or an application.
I mean our engineers, Steve. Sorry, our engineers.
So SBA generally doesn't, for these individual lot developments like this, doesn't get involved in the inspections or the pre-design review. There is some reliance there on the owner's engineer to do all of that work, and they stamp the drawing saying this has been designed in accordance with the town standards, and Jim basically checks the elevations shown and the slopes of the swales and where the downspouts are directed, to confirm that it's been designed in a way that will direct the water in a way that doesn't create impacts on other properties. Obviously, in some cases, there are impacts during construction because there's more runoff when the land is cleared than when it's finished. but the process is designed to, through reliance on the engineering design provided by the owner's engineer, and then the review by town staff and subsequent inspection, to make sure everything's done in accordance with the town standards. If it's really complicated, Jim will pull SBA into the review as well. And I see, Jim has just turned his camera on, and may be able to comment further on that process.
Jim, did you want to comment?
Sure. Yeah, usually with these infill lots, like Steve mentioned, I go out and do a pre-inspection before any approvals or whatnot come before council. I did inspect all 3 of the new lots that were done on School Road there. We were over numerous times because there was a great deal of concern from the neighboring property owners. That grading did check out with what was spec'd by the builders or the property owners' engineers. And actually the flows for those lots would actually be reduced, because a lot of the flow from the leading edge of the house is directed out towards the street now, not basically the whole lot dished before. So it was directing all the water through those lots and out of the neighboring properties to the east. So yeah, we do go through a process, and if I'm not comfortable with that, then I definitely do get a hold of SBA to have their input.
Member Buffett, saw your hand.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, what I was wondering if we could maybe consider, and maybe we can or can't do this, but could we make the approval of the lot severances subject to having a drainage design plan approved? So that would allay any concerns that the neighboring residents have?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I guess just to clarify that, do you mean like come back to council with the drainage plan, or just to have it approved?
Well, the drainage, if they came back with a drainage plan and then after it was severed, then the applicant could have either sell the property or decide to come back and do a more intense development. So that wouldn't make any sense to do that. But I'm just saying, once building applications are applied for, just so that they know, people in the neighborhood know that drainage design plan will have to be approved subject to anything else coming to council. If they're bringing a proposal for a 2-story or a 2-unit development on one lot, that type of thing. We don't know where those parcels of land are in relation to what might actually be getting built on it. So
through you, Mr. Chairman, to the committee members. So the lot grading design and drainage plan is done hand in hand with the building plan. So whatever is built on there will be shown on that grading plan. So the footprint of the house, the driveways, everything that will have a surface other than grass essentially is shown, and then there's runoff assumptions applied to all those surfaces, and then we know how much water is being directed where. So yeah, it's all done in one step in terms of the building permit, lot grading, approval, drainage design, engineering, servicing, and then all of that is one package that gets submitted to the county ultimately for building permit.
yeah, and just to follow up on that I'm well aware of that. And what I'm trying to say is, for this particular application for severance, if we put that wording in there, knowing fully well that is going to take place, it's more of a measure designed to make the residents that are living in the area more comfortable with the fact that will be addressed. That's really what my own point is in saying that.
Does the consent agreement address that, Steve?
We have included in the conditions that they have to enter into a consent agreement, and among the requirements of that agreement are to submit for town review and approval a drainage and grading plan.
Okay.
That's how it is typically dealt
Yeah.
with. Now that plan, though, just to be clear, isn't done typically prior to conditional consent approval, like it hasn't been done yet. But there will be an agreement that will come back to, well, will go to council for authorization prior to final consent approval. And at that stage, the details of that condition will be spelled out in the agreement. So we can certainly, if we have more information about the grading and drainage design at that point, we can be more specific about the requirements in that agreement. So I think that would be a good point in time to come back to it and say, okay, here's some of the details of the grading design and how that's being implemented through a legal agreement.
And just in terms of sort of the sequence of approvals, I mean, obviously what we're looking at tonight is a consent application to create a severance. It's a legal notion. Severing a piece of property is not going to change the drainage in any respect. It won't be until such time as they start building or regrading the property that there may be changes. So if we grant conditional consent tonight, with one of the conditions being that they enter into to the consent agreement, we then have an opportunity, as you mentioned, to give final approval of that consent agreement. And at that time, we could expect to see further details on a drainage plan. And then, am I right in assuming that there would be one further level of approvals at the county level when a building application is applied for? And county engineering would have to be satisfied that the drainage plans and grading associated with that building application are, consistent with what it should be.
It's a good question. All of the steps that you've outlined there are correct. Just one clarification with the county review. There is a drainage component to that, but it's really just the foundation weeping tiles and anything tied to the building itself. They're the final approval on that, but they do rely on the town's review and deposit process and agreement to make sure that the grading of the lot, beyond the house, is satisfactory. If I can add, though, there will be one other checkpoint on this one, and maybe one of the most difficult, agencies to satisfy as it relates to grading is the MTO. I know that they will be reviewing it on this one, but their interest is primarily as it relates to any drainage directed to the highway. So they won't be looking at the back of the property if it's not directed towards the highway.
Okay. So for this committee or this council, we will get to see a copy of the drainage plan prior to sort of granting approval of the consent agreement, or further details at least.
Yeah, we can work with the applicant to require that there is at least a preliminary grading and drainage plan that has some acceptance by. We know that, for example, the east lot is likely going to need to be raised because it's quite low for sanitary servicing. And so we should have, prior to having that agreement finalized, some notion of how that will be achieved. So we will request that the owner submit a grading, engineering, and servicing plan for town review and bring that forward with the draft consent agreement if the conditional consent is granted tonight.
Okay. So Member Buffett, does that sort of satisfy your concern that,
Yeah, I think so.
If we approve it tonight, it will be conditional upon the applicant entering into a consent agreement with the town. Before we give final approval of that consent agreement, we'll see at least a preliminary draft of a drainage plan. So, at that point, we can then get into some more details and presumably have, Steve Burnett or somebody from his company on the line to ask, any engineering questions. Okay. Any other questions from the committee before we jump over to public? No? Okay. Any questions or comments from the public or from the applicant, Mr. Bax? No? Okay, don't see any. All right. Does anybody want to move for approval? Member Fegan, seconded by Member Buffett. Okay, so motion will read, after considering the application, the committee is satisfied with allowing the consent, allowing this consent rather for the purpose of severing approximately 1,406 square meters of land from the original 2,781 square meters of land area for the purposes of a residential lot. The committee, having regard to those matters under subsection 51 sub 24 of the Planning Act, resolves to grant provisional consent subject to the following conditions being fulfilled. Number one, that the Secretary Treasurer's certificate under subsection 5342 of the Planning Act be issued and the Secretary Treasurer's fee be paid. Number two, the payment of cash in lieu of parkland at the rate of 5% of the value of the new created lot. Number three, that the owner enter into an agreement with the town addressing site servicing, grading, and drainage requirements, and the details of all servicing connections, modifications, and improvements to existing services, including sanitary sewers, water supply, storm sewers, roads, hydrants, utilities, and any required easements deemed necessary by the town in accordance with town standards and to the satisfaction of the town's Director of Development and Operations and the town's engineer. Number four, that a highway widening, if required by the Ministry of Transportation of Ontario, along Highway 89 shall be surveyed and dedicated to the satisfaction of the MTO at the cost of the applicant. Number five, approval of the draft reference plan as applicable shall be obtained at the Committee of Adjustment Office, which is the town of Shelburne, and the required number of prints, which is 3 of the resultant deposited reference plan shall be received. And number six, the conditions are to be fulfilled and the consent is to be finalized on or before 1 year from the date of the issuance of the committee's notice of decision. Any discussion or questions on that motion? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Okay, and the last consent application for, what's the address on this one, Steve? 302 First Avenue East.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I believe Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery are here, or at least for this application, B2006, 302 First Avenue East. This application is very similar to applications you've seen previously for corner lot severances. In this case, the subject property is located at the northeast corner of James Street North and First Avenue East. You can see it here on the air photo. The dashed line indicates the proposed south boundary of the proposed severed lot, or the north boundary of the retained lot as it would look if the lot is severed. You can see the existing lot does have an existing single detached home on it. There is a related zoning application in conjunction with this, and it's on council's agenda tonight for a separate public meeting. So we will get more into the zoning details through that presentation. But just to note that one of the requirements to facilitate this severance is a proposed rezoning of both the severed lot and the retained lot. In the case of the retained lot, while the property is currently used for a single detached dwelling, the owners are proposing to convert that dwelling to 3 dwelling units. So right now it's single detached. They're proposing to add a second and third dwelling unit. The second unit is, as we've outlined previously, generally permitted by the zoning bylaw as a converted dwelling. The third unit does require some relief from the zoning bylaw to allow that. In terms of the area context, it's on the edge between a commercial area and mixed use area to the west and a residential area to the east and north. To the south is the former Shelburne Hospital building, which is residential apartments today. To the north, in terms of dwelling types, there are some townhomes and fourplex dwellings on Sarah Court. And the rest of the street is generally single detached. There's the Foodland and Giant Tiger Plaza to the west, and to the southwest is a mix of uses heading into the downtown area. So this is the severance sketch that was provided by the applicant. You can see the north severed lot that's proposed to be zoned R4. It would have an area of 345 square meters, whereas the R4 zone requires a minimum of 300 square meters. So it's proposed to be a bit larger than the zoning bylaw would require in R4. The south existing lot would be reduced in size and would require site-specific zoning. So an R25 zone is proposed. The 578 square meter area for the south lot does meet the R2 zoning requirement for minimum lot area. But there are some existing deficiencies with this lot as it relates to the zoning requirements. So you can see that the house, so the west wall of the house is right along here. And the right-of-way limit of James Street is right here. At its closest point, the house is only 0.7 meter off of the lot line along James Street. So that's an existing condition. It's legal non-complying as the house predates the current zoning bylaw requirements. Normally that side yard would be a minimum of 4.5 meters on a corner lot in the R2 zone. So to clean that up, it's proposed that through the rezoning, a site-specific R25 be put in place to recognize that existing condition. If the severance were approved, the side yard, or the rear yard becomes obviously not as deep, and the existing attached garage would not quite meet the 7.5 meter rear yard requirement. The house would, but the rest of the attached garage would be at 6.4 meters. Let's see here. I'll refer back to the zoning, existing zoning and proposed zoning as part of the next public meeting for the zoning application. The applications were circulated together, both the consent and rezoning, to these agencies, and this is a summary of the responses that we've received, very similar to the previous applications as summarized tonight. The Hydro One has just made the additional note that there is an existing pole with anchors near the northwest corner of the existing property, but that should not affect the proposal in terms of driveways and servicing connections. SBA Engineering also reviewed to determine servicing, and Jim looked at this as well, and we've confirmed through that review that there are water services available on James Street, so the severed lot can be connected to that water main on James Street, which is relatively straightforward. SBA did note that the rear yard, the proposed severed lot, is a low-lying area, so it's likely that the drainage from that area will require a catch basin in the backyard, which is sometimes required. And then that catch basin would need to have a storm sewer basically through the yard into the James Street storm sewer. That's a kind of a preliminary comment, but again, like other severances, this would require a detailed lot grading and severance plan for review. Sanitary connection, like some other corner lots, is the most complicated, which will require, because there's no sanitary sewer on James Street, will require extension of the main from First Avenue up to the proposed severed lot along the boulevard of James Street or within the traveled portion. That's generally done by directional drilling, so they don't have to open up the whole road. There is, they've just noted there's ample room for a driveway for the severed lot, and that James Street widens to the north. I just want to highlight that briefly, going back to the property map. So you can see at this point, going north, James Street is a bit wider, whereas at this property it narrows. And in fact, it's that width all the way down across First Ave and down to Main Street on the south side of Main as well. Many of the older existing rights of way in the original plan for the town are only 50 feet or 50 meters wide. Where they become newer roads or have been extended in the past, they're 20 meters as the standard minimum road allowance. The question from the engineering consultants was, should that 20-meter width be widened at least through the severed lot? Obviously, it couldn't be through the existing lot because the house is within that portion. they haven't recommended anything, but that's just an impact I wanted to relay to council, that if council desired to take a widening here, wouldn't really achieve very much in terms of, you couldn't do the rest until something happened differently with the existing house. But they just flagged that at this point, the right of way does get narrower. That's it for the engineering comments. The standard consent conditions are recommended if the committee is in agreement to provide a conditional approval, including the requirement for a consent agreement, a zoning bylaw amendment, which again will be presented in a separate meeting tonight, and all of the other conditions. Draft and final reference plan must be satisfied within 1 year. So we have not received, I don't believe, any public comments to date on this one, but we are here to receive comments both from the committee and the public tonight. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay. Any questions from the committee? I have one, Steve, and I mean, it's probably more appropriately asked when we get to the zoning amendment question, but I'll ask it now anyways. The retained lot where the existing house is, the side yard setback you mentioned, I mean, that predated the current zoning bylaw, so it's essentially legal non-conforming. So that's not really an issue. The new rear setback is going to be shorter than what's required. But you're recommending that we just deal with both right now, just kind of tidy it up and bring both into conformity with the bylaw?
Well, basically what we're recommending is that if you grant, conditional consent approval, that one of the conditions be that they also obtain approval of rezoning, and then the merits of those reduced yards can be considered as part of that. But just thinking 5 minutes ahead of time here, we have identified that in other similar lot severances, a rear yard of 6 meters has been accepted. In this case, they still have a decent sized rear yard because it's 7.5 meters for the house, which meets the zoning. It's just that garage is set back extra far, which actually turns out to be more beneficial from a parking perspective because the driveway is nice and long. Yeah. But yeah, right now that garage meets the rear yard. With the severance, it no longer would, and therefore the rezoning is a condition of the consent.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee? Any public questions? Any comments from the applicants? No? Okay.
No, we're good.
Okay. Can I get a motion then? Approved. Councilor Renato, seconded by Wagner. Okay, so after considering the application, the committee is satisfied with allowing the consent for the purpose of severing 345 square meters from the original 923 square meters for the purposes of creating a new residential lot. The committee, having regard to those matters under subsection 51 sub 24 of the Planning Act, resolves to grant provisional consent subject to the following conditions being fulfilled. Number one, the Secretary Treasurer's certificate under subsection 5342 of the Planning Act shall be issued and the Secretary Treasurer's fee be paid. Number two, the payment of cash in lieu of parkland at the rate of 5% of the value of the new created lot. Number three, that the owner enter into an agreement with the town addressing site servicing, grading, and drainage requirements, and the details of all servicing connections, modifications, and improvements to existing services, including sanitary sewers, water supplies, storm sewers, roads, hydrants, utilities, and any required easements deemed necessary by the town in accordance with the town's standards and to the satisfaction of the town's Director of Development and Operations and the town's engineer. The requirement to construct a new driveway and required parking spaces on the severed lot, and the payment of required fees. Number four, that the owner obtain approval of a zoning bylaw amendment for the two resultant lots to a zone that will accommodate the proposed lot areas, yards, and setbacks. Number five, approval of the draft reference plan as applicable, shall be obtained by the Committee of Adjustment Office, and the required number of prints of the resultant deposited reference plan should be received, and the conditions are to be fulfilled and the consent is to be finalized on or before 1 year from the date of the issuance of the committee's notice of decision. Questions or comments on that? All in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. All right. So I guess that's it for Committee of Adjustment. Can I get a motion to adjourn our Committee of Adjustment meeting? Member Bernardo, seconded by Member Keegan. All in favor? Carried. Okay. You want to take a quick 5-minute break, stretch your legs before we come back and call the council meeting to order?